2 years ago, I met this girl, let's call her Jessica. I work in the auto industry, running a blog and even publishing articles in automotive magazines. I also have a YouTube channel where I share tips and stories about cars. One day, some friends of mine reached out and asked if I could help Jessica find a car. Her budget was tight, so paying for professional services wasn't an option. They hoped I could assist her as a favor. I happened to be on vacation at the time and figured, why not? I agreed. My friends passed along my number, and Jessica sent me this detailed voicemail explaining her situation and what she needed. I got back to her, broke down how we'd handle things, and set a date when I'd be free to help. By the time that day rolled around, I'd already done some homework. I lined up a few potential options and even planned a trip to a nearby town, about 25 miles away, to check them out. She tagged along, of course. The car hunt turned into a pleasant little road trip. Jessica wasn't just easy to talk to, she was sharp, funny, and genuinely interesting. By the time we wrapped up, I dropped her off downtown and headed back home. Unfortunately, we didn't find anything suitable that day, or even in the days after. Eventually, Jessica told me her funds had run out, so the search was on hold for the time being. That's when we started messaging on WhatsApp. She even tracked me down on Instagram. Apparently, she got my handle from mutual friends, and followed me. Over the next couple of weeks, we exchanged messages here and there, keeping things light and casual. Fast forward about a month. I was in her city for the day. It's a place I visit pretty often, great vibes, lots of friends, the ocean, cozy cafes. Jessica happened to text me, just a casual, "Hey, how's it going?" I told her I was out with some friends nearby, and we decided to meet up. She sent me an address, and we arranged to meet later that night around 10 p.m. When I picked her up, we grabbed some sushi and headed to the beach. It was a relaxed second meeting, eating, walking, and chatting by the water. I wasn't overly flirty or anything, she was the one initiating most of the conversations and plans. After dropping her off at home, I thanked her for the lovely evening and drove away. That's when I realized I was starting to feel something for her. Now, I'll be honest, Jessica is captivating. She's got this creative streak, loves good music, paints, plays the keyboard, and I'm into music too, especially the guitar. We kept in touch, met up occasionally, and I couldn't help but realize I was growing more and more drawn to her. At one point during one of our hangouts, I jokingly admitted I liked her. She laughed it off, saying she wasn't looking for a relationship and was perfectly fine on her own. Besides, in a couple of months she had plans to go abroad for work for 4 months. A relationship wasn't exactly on her radar. Then her birthday came around. She invited me, saying it'd be a mix of her friends, and she'd love for us all to meet. I wanted to give her something memorable, something that wasn't just a material gift. So, I surprised her with a trip to a go-kart track. We went to this massive arena, raced around, and had an absolute blast. It was the kind of gift that created memories, not just moments. I could tell she enjoyed spending time with me. Jessica still lived with her mom, which is pretty normal at 25. But what surprised me was how chill her mom was about her hosting friends, and even drinking at home. Turns out, her mom worked nights, so she wasn't around much anyway. I thought it was odd, sure, but I figured it wasn't my place to question it. The party was loud and lively, and I jumped right in. I'm naturally outgoing, so it didn't take long for me to hit it off with everyone there. At that point in my life, I was easygoing, cheerful, and always up for a good time, before things got complicated with her, that is. After her birthday, I went back to my routine. I had a car in the shop that a client was rushing me to finish, so I spent 2 solid days working on it. In between, I was filming for my channel and only staying in touch with Jessica over the phone. On the 3rd day, she invited me over again, another little gathering, this time with just a couple of her friends and me. I told her up front I wouldn't be drinking since I had to drive back afterward, but she suggested I just stay the night. Once I'd wrapped up my work, I decided to go. It turned out to be a good time, but by the end of the night, I was dead tired from the alcohol and exhaustion. One of her friends left, and the other stayed over. I crashed on the couch while her friend took the other room. Jessica ended up lying down next to me. I remember waking up in the middle of the night as she was covering me with a blanket. Half asleep, I asked her what time it was because I needed to leave early enough to have breakfast before work. She told me it was still night, and then lay down beside me. She'd been drinking, and honestly, either of us was in the best shape. We started talking, half awake, half asleep, and at some point, we ended up kissing. I don't even remember when I passed out, but apparently she fell asleep first. In the morning, her mom offered me tea, but I politely declined and headed straight to my car. That day, I didn't text or call her at all. By the evening, though, I realized I couldn't just leave things like that. I called her and explained that I didn't want things to move in that direction. The truth? I did want it, badly. But I also really liked her, and I wasn't ready for a relationship, especially with someone who'd be leaving in a few weeks. She understood, and we agreed not to bring it up again. I decided to focus on my own life and let our communication fizzle out. Then, a mutual friend asked me to help Jessica move her stuff to a new apartment. It was a simple favor, just loading things up and dropping them off at the new place. Jessica knew I'd be in town, so she called and offered to help. The three of us got the move done quickly, and while our friend stayed behind to unpack, Jessica and I went out to talk. At first, she was making small talk, trying to keep things light. When I said I'd better head out, she stopped me and opened up. She admitted she liked me too and had been thinking a lot about that night. She wanted to be with me, if I was okay with it. I won't lie, I was thrilled to hear it. But there was still the issue of her leaving in 3 weeks. Despite my better judgment, I said yes. We went back to her place, opened a bottle of wine, put on some music, and well, one thing led to another. Later, we played instruments together, her on the keyboard, me on the guitar. It was such a simple, carefree night. For the next 3 weeks, I practically lived at her place. We spent our evenings walking around, going to cafes, watching movies, and hanging out with her friends. There were more parties, more laughter, and of course, more time together. Then came the day she had to leave. I drove her to the airport, and we exchanged little keepsakes before she went through security. We took a few photos, shared some hugs and kisses, and that was it. She flew off, and I stayed behind, counting the days until she'd come back. While she was away, she kept writing about how hard things were for her. She'd say people were treating her unfairly, and I tried to support her however I could. I even sent her money a few times. Honestly, she worried me a lot, sometimes even scared me with the things she said. One day, I hit my limit and told her to just come back. I said I'd cover her trip home because, honestly, screw that job. I got angry and told her I didn't understand why she was putting herself through it. At the time, I had no clue what her job really was. It wasn't until 1.5 years later that I found out she'd been working as a hostess in a karaoke bar. Back then, though, all I knew was that she said she couldn't come back because of a contract. If she left early, she wouldn't get paid at all. After a month, her behavior started changing. She became distant and unpredictable in ways I'd never experienced before. She'd text me late at night, saying things like she wasn't good enough for me, that I deserved better, and that I'd leave her someday. It drove me nuts. She kept me up all night with her messages, and looking back now, I see it was manipulation. But back then? I was an idiot who thought she was just scared of losing me. I convinced myself that this was her way of showing love. Her texts got shorter, and she always seemed to be in a rush. I started feeling like she wasn't telling me the whole story, and truthfully, things were already unraveling. A few days later, she came clean, or at least, that's what I thought. She told me we needed to break up because she'd met someone else, fallen in love, and didn't want to lie to me anymore. She told me I was a great guy and deserved better. Blah blah blah. You know how it goes. It had only been 1.5 months since she'd left. And get this, the new guy was Chinese, and this whole thing was happening in China. I was furious, but I managed to hold it together and told her I appreciated her honesty. What a joke. We didn't stop talking completely after that. Occasionally, we'd exchange messages, mostly polite. "How are you?" type stuff. But then she'd text me while drunk, rambling nonsense. I didn't get it. She had this new boyfriend, right? Why wasn't she unloading her problems on him instead of me? Despite everything, I still had feelings for her. Like a fool, I believed she was at least being honest with me. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. After 4 months, she came back. Her visa had expired, so she had to leave China temporarily to renew it before going back. She was planning to return to her job and to her boyfriend, who, as it turned out, was the DJ at the club where she worked. From what I heard, they were drinking together and dabbling in, well, let's just say some shady stuff. It left a bad taste in my mouth. We ran into each other at a mutual friends gathering, but we barely spoke. Then one day, she asked if I could give her a ride to the airport. She said she'd cover the gas, and I didn't have the heart to say no. So, a couple of days later, I drove her there, and she flew out. That's when things got even crazier. Apparently, she got caught up in some kind of legal mess. The police were on her case, and she couldn't work or leave the country. At one point, she was basically stuck in a hotel while her boyfriend would show up in the morning after his shift, and then leave again by the afternoon. Sitting here now, writing this, I can't believe the circus I was wrapped up in. About a month later, she got dumped and came back home. We ended up sleeping together a few times. Yeah, I know, not my proudest moments. She apologized for everything she'd done to me, asked me to come over, and tried to make things right. I told her I was too busy with work, and would see her later in the winter. But I wasn't fooling anyone. One day, I just showed up unannounced like some kind of storm, ready to talk things out. We ended up at another big gathering. Everyone was having fun, and she suggested we all go back to her place to keep the party going. Everyone was on board with her idea to keep the party going, and like an idiot, I went along too. I knew my feelings for her hadn't gone anywhere, and deep down, I shouldn't have been there. But I followed the crowd, straight back to her place. As the night wore on, people started trickling out until it was just the three of us again, her friend, and me. When it was time to crash, she ended up lying down next to me. At first I thought it was like before, but then I heard her whispering into her phone. She was talking to that same Chinese guy. The conversation was in English, and my language skills were good enough to catch every word. She was telling him how much she loved him, asking why he'd hurt her, saying he was all she had. Stuff like that. It felt like someone had dropped a boulder on my chest. I broke down right there. I got up, barely able to hold back tears, and said, "I can't do this. I'm not playing along with this ridiculous charade anymore." She didn't even flinch. She just looked at me and said, "I love him. I'm with him now. I won't stop you from leaving." So I left. The whole drive home, I was screaming at the top of my lungs, shouting over the music, trying to drown out the pain tearing me apart from the inside. Just 3 months ago, she was telling me she loved me, and now she was so wrapped up in this guy that I felt like I'd been erased. I decided right then to cut her off completely. Deleted her number, blocked her on every platform, and made sure she couldn't reach me. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I couldn't take it anymore. Of course, I told her beforehand. She asked if we could stay friends. I told her no. I'd already humiliated myself enough. Time passed, and friends eventually told me she'd gone abroad again and split up with that guy. Months went by, 7 to be exact, and I started to feel like I'd finally moved on. I unblocked her on WhatsApp, not thinking much of it, and got back to my life. Then she started lurking. She'd view my social media stories and check my statuses but never actually reach out. It messed with my head. She started popping up in my dreams, and nostalgia hit me like a freight train. I couldn't stop thinking about her. One night, after a few too many drinks with friends, I caved. I texted her, spilling my guts, telling her I still loved her. God, what a moron. She replied almost immediately, saying she'd been wanting to reach out but didn't know how. She said she was so glad I'd messaged her, and that she missed me. She told me she'd be back soon and really wanted to see me. Like an idiot, I offered to meet her at the airport. Of course, she said yes. When she arrived, I was over the moon, like some lovesick puppy. We picked up right where we left off. Love, romance, intimacy, the whole 9 yards. 2 months passed in a blur, and then I got an opportunity to move to the capital. It was a chance to level up in my field, teach others, and finally break out of the rut I'd been in professionally. But I didn't want to go without her. She'd mentioned moving before, so I brought it up again. I told her I wanted us to go together. She said she didn't want to rely on me financially, that she didn't have any savings, and it made her feel embarrassed. I assured her it wasn't a big deal. I told her she could go back to school. She'd always wanted to study at the Institute of Contemporary Art, and I'd handle the bills until she got on her feet. She hesitated but eventually agreed. We started packing, bought our tickets, and began shipping our things. She quit her part-time job, and one day, with a sly smile, she said, "Before we leave, I'm just going to sit on your neck for a bit. That okay?" I laughed it off and told her it was fine. What an idiot I was. Before we left, we had a big send-off. 2 days of goodbyes, one with her friends, then one with mine. And finally, the day of departure arrived. That morning, her mom pulled me aside. We always got along great, she treated me well, and I genuinely liked her. She said, "Let's sit down for a second." Her tone was serious, and I wasn't ready for what came next. She told me, "Jessica is a complicated person. If she needs to, she'll go over anyone's head to get what she wants. And if it benefits her, she won't hesitate to screw you over. You're a good man, but she's, well, let's just say she's not always kind. Are you ready for the possibility that she might throw you out one day when it suits her?" I just sat there stunned. I knew their relationship was rocky, but I always assumed it was just the usual tension of two grown women living under one roof. I wasn't expecting this. I managed to ask, "Why are you telling me this now?" She said she'd been waiting for the right time to talk, but now that Jessica was leaving, she felt like she couldn't stay silent. Then she told me about one of Jessica's exes, a guy a lot like me. Hardworking, passionate about his job, someone who took care of her and gave her a comfortable life. But according to her mom, Jessica got bored. She started cheating on him, lying through her teeth, and barely covered her tracks. Eventually, the guy found out and dumped her. I was floored. My head was spinning. Why was I hearing this now, right before we were supposed to leave? Jessica walked in, arguing with her mom about opening champagne first thing in the morning. Her mom just brushed her off, saying, "It's a celebration, my daughter's moving out." I sat there on the edge of the doormat, trying to make sense of everything. What was I supposed to do? Believe her mom? Confront Jessica? Call off the move? My friend was already on the way to pick us up, and there was no time to figure it out. I decided to push it aside for now. Whatever needed sorting could wait until after we landed. We met my friend, loaded the suitcases, said goodbye to her mom, and headed to the airport. But that conversation stuck with me the whole way there. The move went smoothly. We rented an apartment, high floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place I'd always dreamed of. Even though we chose it together, I was thrilled that our tastes matched. For a while, it felt like everything was falling into place. A few days later, I told her about what her mom had said. Jessica brushed it off, saying her mom liked to exaggerate. She admitted there was some truth to the story but said her mom didn't know the whole picture. According to Jessica, she had a boyfriend, met someone else, and ended things. It wasn't cheating, in her eyes, just bad timing. Still, the whole thing sounded uncomfortably familiar. After the move, things started to unravel. She missed her friends and family and fell into a slump. Then came the panic attacks. I stayed up nights trying to calm her down, watching her twist and turn like she was being torn apart. It was heartbreaking. That's when the drinking started. Not just casual drinking, but heavy, destructive drinking. She reconnected with a friend in the city, someone with the same issue. This guy had been through rehab for alcoholism and had a violent streak to boot. The whole situation was a mess. Meanwhile, I threw myself into work. The new environment, the grueling schedule, I loved every second of it. I felt like I was finally doing something meaningful, and being in the city made me happy. I thought having her there with me would make it even better. But instead of support, I came home to resentment. She'd barely look at me, and when she did, it was with annoyance. She started picking at everything, what I read, how I thought, even the way I handled tools around the house. I couldn't win. Suddenly, I was useless, thoughtless, and apparently incapable of fixing a sink. Anyway, she started going off the rails. She began spending a lot of time with this friend of hers. Andrew, I'd met him before. She introduced us, but the guy gave me a bad vibe. Still, I didn't press the issue. Big mistake. One night I got home from work, and she wasn't there. I called her up. "Oh, I'm at Andrew's. We had a drink, just hanging out." "Great," I said. "But you couldn't tell me first? You were working." "I didn't want to bother you," she replied casually. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't good. Later that night, I texted her to ask when she'd be home. No reply. I waited, lying there in bed, staring at my phone until I fell asleep. When I woke up, she still wasn't back. The next day, I had to head to work, but I kept trying to call her. No response. I was stuck all day in a fog of frustration and worry. When I finally got off work and made it home late, the apartment was still empty. I called again, nothing. She didn't show up for 3 days. 3 days. When she finally walked through the door, she looked like hell and said she needed a doctor. I lost it. "What the hell is going on? Where were you?" She deflected, saying Andrew had given her some pills and that they didn't sit well. I was furious. "Pills? What kind of pills? Are you out of your mind?" I called Andrew, demanding answers, but the guy just mumbled some nonsense. He wasn't making any sense, and it only made me angrier. A few days later, the same thing happened again. This time, I was convinced she'd been sleeping with him from the start. Her behavior spiraled, constant screaming matches, her shrieking at the top of her lungs, and then, the violence. She started throwing things, scratching, and even taking swings at me. I had bruises and scratches all over, but what hit me harder was the realization I didn't even recognize her anymore. I thought she needed help, real help. But she wasn't interested. She refused to find a job, claiming she was looking but putting in no actual effort. Meanwhile, I was covering rent and every other expense on my own. I told her I couldn't keep doing it all. I needed her to step up. Instead, she flipped the narrative. She got mad, accusing me of rubbing it in her face that I was paying for everything. "How could I ever trust you?" she spat. It was absurd. She was living comfortably off my hard work, drinking, disappearing for days, and blaming me. Then intimacy went out the window entirely. One night, I came home and overheard her talking to a friend. What I heard froze me in my tracks. "I hate that he's doing so well here, and I'm not. I hate him for it." That was the final straw. I couldn't do this anymore. I still loved her, but I couldn't keep destroying myself for someone who clearly didn't care. I took a couple of days to think things through and gather my strength. Then I sat her down and said, "I can't keep living like this. You're out of control, and I can't take it anymore. We need to break up." She agreed. But then there was the apartment issue. She told me she had a job lined up but needed time to save enough to move out. I told her I wouldn't kick her out on the street and gave her 2 months to figure things out. Of course, it turns out her so-called partner wasn't stepping up to take her in. He was happy to sleep with her and send her home. Real stand-up guy. Then she started disappearing again, gone for days at a time. I finally confronted her. "For someone with nowhere to go, you sure don't spend much time here." After that, she started staying home again, sleeping in the same bed. But of course, nothing else. I could feel her irritability rubbing off on me, and before I knew it, I was on edge all the time. One argument led to another, scandal after scandal, both of us throwing complaints back and forth. Finally, we sat down and decided we'd live our own lives under the same roof, not interfering with each other. It helped, at least for a while. We even managed to talk like normal people sometimes. She started having her work friends over. We'd sit around, talk, and play games. It was nice, until she pulled me aside one day and asked me not to mention that we had anything going on. I laughed and said, "What's there to say? We don't have anything going on." But her asking stuck with me. Then I realized why. Andrew would show up sometimes, and whenever he was around, they both acted like innocent little lambs. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up. A month passed like that. Then this virus thing hit, and she went into full panic mode. "We're all gonna die. Everything's falling apart. I can't stay here anymore," she said, spiraling. I told her to calm down. "If you don't want to stay, then go to Andrew's," I said, half joking but mostly annoyed. My job was stable, so I wasn't stressing like she was. That seemed to shut her up. Still, things weren't great. She lost her job early, before the mall officially shut down. Why? She got drunk, fell on her way home, and sprained a ligament in her leg. I did what I could to help. Took her to the trauma center, carried her on my back, ran around buying meds and supplies, even put her on a sports diet for recovery. I made sure she had everything she needed. Then I found out Andrew had been coming over while I was at work. Of course, I was the last to know. She started texting me sweet things, how much my care meant to her, how the apartment was starting to feel like home, how she didn't want to leave. Like an idiot, I let myself believe her. Things actually did get calmer for a bit. But, of course, there's always a but. One morning, I had a day off, and her friend called her up. "We're here with a friend. Why don't we hang out since you're stuck at home?" Jessica asked if I was okay with it. I said, "Sure, I could use a break too." They showed up in the afternoon. We ran to the store, grabbed some food, and settled in for the evening. At some point, though, things got weird. These three were clearly caught up in some drama I wasn't clued in on. Andrew and I ended up stepping out to the balcony for a smoke. By then I was drunk, so the details of the conversation are hazy. But I remember him saying something that hit like a freight train. "She and I had sex on your bed while you were at work. I'd come over, screw her, and leave." I don't remember what happened after that. The next day, I woke up with a busted lip, and he was limping like he messed up his knee. My brain must have gone into defense mode and blocked it all out, because it didn't really hit me until I was alone in the apartment. When I came to, one of her friends was staying at the apartment. Apparently, Jessica had invited her to crash with us for a couple of days. I was so hungover and miserable I couldn't even care. Then, like clockwork, Andrew showed up again that evening. Still limping, he casually tried to figure out where he'd hurt his knee. Meanwhile, I was just trying not to lose my mind. I was sprawled out, feeling half dead, while the chaos around me started to wear on my nerves. Jessica and her crew decided it was a good time to gather up and drink. Needing a breather, I grabbed the trash, got dressed, and told Andrew to pack up and get out. That's when things took an unexpected turn. Andrew's landlord suddenly told him he had to vacate the apartment by tomorrow. No warning, no options, just out. It left him with nowhere to go. Jessica looked at me, her eyes pleading, and asked if Andrew could crash at our place for a couple of days as a last resort. Like an idiot, I agreed, figuring if there were no other options, what harm could a couple of days do? Plus, selfishly, I thought it'd be easier to stay close to Jessica without too much hassle. I headed out to take care of some errands while Andrew started packing his things. Tossed the trash, had a smoke, cleared my head for a bit. When I got back, though, chaos had broken loose. These guys were having a full-blown argument, and their friend wouldn't even let me into my own apartment. My patience snapped. I shoved the door open, stormed in, and found them huddled together, messing with the room door, frame and all, like they were up to something shady. Jessica rushed up to me, panicked, begging me not to lose it. She claimed it wasn't Andrew's fault. According to her, she and her friend had pushed him, and he somehow went flying into the door. I wasn't buying any of it. I kicked them all out, starting with Andrew. I didn't hold back, gave him a piece of my mind, and made sure he knew he wasn't welcome anymore. Jessica and her friend stayed, though. That night, Jessica lay beside me, stroking my arm and kissing me. She snuggled up close, whispering sweet nothings, trying to calm me down. My buddy chimed in from the side, saying, "Man, it's good to see her like this, next to the one she loves." But my head was pounding so much I couldn't even process it. I passed out hard and fast. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to an empty apartment. It felt lighter somehow, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, though, I woke up to a bombshell. There was a message waiting for me from someone, Andrew, I guessed. It said, "Check her Facebook. Here's the password to her laptop. Go ahead." Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened her account. What I found, man, it hit me like a truck. Page after page of messages full of insults about me, how annoying I was, how much of a fool I'd been. There were threats like, "If we're quarantined, I'll kill him here," and other garbage. And then the worst part, details about how she and Andrew had been hooking up behind my back. On my bed, no less. Messages about how much she wanted him, how she missed him, and how she thought I was too dumb to figure it out. Turns out, her coworkers were in on it too. They thought I was just some jealous friend she lived with. They knew everything but kept it from me. The betrayal stung deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. I confronted Jessica that same day, told her I knew everything. I packed her stuff, handed her the keys, and told her to leave. That evening, Jessica, Andrew, and her friend showed up at my door. I didn't even let them in, threw her stuff into the hallway, dragged her out by the hair when she resisted, and let Andrew have a taste of his own medicine a couple of times. After that, all three of them blocked me on every platform imaginable, which honestly just made me despise them more. Jessica flew back to wherever she came from within 2 days. I didn't care if she was with Andrew or not, it didn't matter anymore. A couple of weeks later, I posted something funny on my social media. Out of nowhere, Jessica viewed it. She'd unblocked me, probably just to remind me she existed. But I wasn't about to let her back into my life. I hid my post from her and moved on. Now, it's been 3 months. Things are finally looking up. I got promoted, earning more money, and I've been focusing on fixing up my place and spending on myself for a change. I'm not even thinking about dating right now, there's no time for that. But I'll tell you this, kicking that snake out of my life was the best thing I've ever done. To anyone reading this, I hope my story helps you in some way. Life's too short for toxic relationships. And hey, keep supporting this channel, it's worth it. Thanks for sticking with me to the end.